Gracias a Dios for my café con leche. Hola y'all, welcome back to my channel. You are watching Shelly Flowers Reads and Writes, where I talk about all things related to reading and writing. I am Michelle Flores, and today we are going to be talking about my wrap up for the week 2 of the Sealey Challenge. Now, for those of you who don't know what the Sealey Challenge is, I am linking a video above in the cards where I talked about what the challenge is and all the books I plan on reading for this challenge. But just to kind of sum it up quickly, this is basically a challenge where anyone can read any book of poetry or chapbook of poetry during the month of August. I'm kind of struggling this week, I'm not gonna lie. I only got 5 books done, which isn't terrible. It's just not where I wanted to be at this point, and there's a couple reasons for that. One, I started working again, so that was interesting. My school started their professional development for the summer, and so we're prepping for the school year, and I gotta say, 10 years into this job, it's real weird. It's a real weird year. And it was also my birthday on Thursday, so I am officially a 32-year-old lady. Anyway, with all that being said, let me go ahead and talk about these books, and we can be on our merry way. I prioritized reading books from local authors here to Florida, specifically Jacksonville in North Florida. So those were the first 4 books that I read this week. The first one is this chapbook that I've had for a few years now, and this is called Coastal Scenes by Stephen Croft. Stephen Croft is a Florida poet, but I believe he's now based in Georgia, just north of the Florida-Georgia border. And I used this book to fulfill the challenge of reading a book of poetry that includes illustrations. I had another book picked originally, but I knew that this week was going to be kind of a struggle for me, so I figured this would actually fit that challenge a little bit better than the book I had originally planned. I really enjoyed this book. I think it's, it's not the most challenging book of poetry I've ever read, but I really appreciated the care that Stephen Croft took to describe the North Florida scenery, the flora, the fauna, if you will, because I do feel like in a lot of ways, Florida is not described in those really poetic terms. So I loved that he took the time to do that. He also included a lot of really cute illustrations in the book. So a lot of these places are places that I've been to. This looks like North Florida beach homes. And I can just tell that this was put together with a lot of care. And I really do love these illustrations. I don't think this chapbook is available anywhere. I found this in my local bookstore, which is like a few blocks away from where I live. So I think it was literally just he got this book printed and then dropped them off at local bookstores, which is a very common practice. So if you happen to be in the North Florida area, there is a bookstore called the Book Nook. I'm gonna link information about it down below. You should still be able to find copies in there. I think there's like 2 or 3 left. And do some good. Support a local author and also support a local bookstore. Win-win, right? Next up, we have Swamp Mind, Arctic Blood by Jessie Cole. This book I used to fulfill the challenge of read a book of poetry by an author local to your city or as local as you can get. So Jessie Cole is an author that I really admire. I've gotten to see him perform his poems before, or I also read his previous chapbook that he published, and he self-publishes these chapbooks. They're so weird and wonderful, and he has such a distinctive voice, which is really interesting. So I am linking his website where you can purchase this book below. The only thing that kind of sucks about this author is that once his chapbooks sell out, that's it. You can't find him anywhere else. I have tried to look for his other ones and I can't find them. So if you're into it, I suggest you get it. So here's the first line to this chapbook. It is hard to believe we are at war unless we write about it. And I just thought that was a line that really punched me in the stomach when I read it, because it's true. Like, as a country, we've been at war for, 20 years now? And we just don't talk about it. We pretend like it's not happening. And there's so many other things that we could talk about that fit that same kind of description. So that's the kind of introspective work you're gonna get from this author, but that also comments on society as a whole. and I just don't see many people doing it the way that he's doing it. So highly suggest you get this book if you're into more challenging, a little bit more esoteric, but obviously very rewarding kind of poetry. Next up, I read Emotionally Speaking by Kia Barlow. So Kia Barlow is another Jacksonville poet. I bought this book 3 or 4 years ago at the Jacks by Jacks Book Festival, which is this festival we have in Jacksonville every year where poets and writers and picture book authors from all over the city come together to sell their books and talk about books. And there's even events. One year R.L. Stine came, which was really cool. Last year, the guy who wrote Scythe, I haven't read his book, so I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was there last year, so it's a pretty big deal. I think Nicole Sealey was there a couple years ago as well. So there's some big name writers that come, and it's really fun. This book fulfilled the challenge of reading a book of poetry by someone who was younger than 20 years old. I'm actually not sure how old Kia Barlow is. I just made that assumption based off of when I met her and I talked to her. She was younger than me at the time that I bought the book, and I was only about 25 then. So who knows? She could have been significantly older than me and I just didn't know, but that was my guesstimate. I, unfortunately though, did not like this book. I thought it was okay when I read it the first time around, but since then my poetry taste has really expanded and I've really pushed myself in what I'm reading. So this felt a little bit too like diary, if that makes sense. Like I felt like I was reading someone's diary. I've talked about before, I don't enjoy epistolary anything. I don't like that very limited perspective. I want to see some connection to like a wider world or a wider perspective, and that was a really big issue for me in this book. I think the other thing too was like there was an attempt at doing things. There was an attempt at creating a rhyme scheme, at creating consistent imagery, but it wasn't consistent, and that was another big issue for me. Like if you're gonna make a poem a rhyming poem, go for it. Or if you're gonna break those rhyme schemes, do it in a way that is intentional. And I just felt like a lot of these poems were probably first or second drafts, and there wasn't much more thought put into them than that. So unfortunately, I did not like it, which means I am gonna unhaul this book. If you are interested in reading it though, let me know. I think if you are someone who is much more into spoken word style poetry or something that's a little bit more raw and unfinished, this might be a great option for you. She also goes really deep into relationships that she's had that were not very successful. So if that is more your taste, let me know. I'd be more than happy to send this off to you. But for me, it just wasn't my particular taste for poetry. Next up, we have The Moving Waters by Mary Jane Riles. So she was actually my professor in undergrad. I took a travel writing course with her when I went to Valencia, Spain for a study abroad program I was a part of. I really enjoyed her travel writing course. I think she is a great professor, and I can tell that she's a very technically skilled writer. This book also fulfilled the challenge of reading a book of poetry by someone who is older than 60 years old. That was the frustrating thing for me with this book, was like I didn't hate the writing. I actually found the writing to be really beautiful, and I think as a poet she is very clearly someone who is technically skilled and has honed her craft quite a bit. My issue was with a lot of her topics, it felt very othering. She had this tendency of writing about Spanish culture, like from Spain, to be clear, because we won't get into that. But she's someone who travels a lot to Spain, had a tendency of writing about Spanish culture, and the culture was just very exotified. And as someone who is Hispanic and has also been to Spain, I just found it to be very odd. There were times where she would use Spanish and italicize the words, which I hate. I hate it when writers do that. There's no purpose to do it other than to point out that it's a different language, and I just don't like that. I don't see the point in that. And that goes for any language that does it. If you don't know what a word is, look it up. That's really my feeling on it. But anyway, there were other times where she wrote like about other cultures and did the same thing. Like there was one poem about Vietnam, And it was a very tender and sweet poem about this mother-daughter moment that she was having, but her daughter was very upset and talking about how poor the Vietnamese people were. And I was kind of like, this is a very strange poem to write. Like, okay, so your daughter's crying and you're comforting her because she noticed that people were poor? I don't know. It just felt very weird to me. And then at the same time, though, the poem was really beautiful. And I loved the last lines where it said, "That night you fell asleep to light rain on your face. In the morning I asked you if lightning struck your dreams. In your half-waking eyes, as if I were still the world, you wrapped me in your arms." So that's what I mean when I say she's a very technically skilled writer. I can tell that she's put a lot of thought into her work. I can tell that she focuses a lot on building imagery to convey an emotional resonance. And yet, some of her work is a little bit problematic to me. So I rated this book 3 stars. It was a gift from her, and I never read it until now. It's been over 10 years since I graduated undergrad, so bad on me. But, you know, I think it's okay. I will also say the publishing company that made this book is out of business. They were out of business in 2013, so I don't think this book can be found anywhere, but I will do my best to put a link to it down below if I can find it. Okay, the last book that I read was Heart Talk by Cleo Wade. So I used this book to fulfill the challenge of reading a book of poetry by a Black author. Cleo Wade is a Black woman. This was another, like, you know, not so great for me. I rated it 3 stars. It was a gift from my best friend, which I thought was very sweet, but this type of poetry is just not for me at this point in my life. I'd say if you're someone who really enjoys Amanda Lovelace or Rupi Kaur or more Insta poets like that, you might really enjoy this book, but I personally just did not find any of the poems in it particularly interesting or moving in any way. It's very similar to Amanda Lovelace. It's an idea that gets broken up into lines, but I didn't see much imagery. I didn't see much playing with language. I didn't see much depth of thought put into the poems. It just seemed like the author had an idea, broke it up into lines, and then called it a poem. I'm not against that form of poetry. I think that kind of poetry has its place, and I think it's actually really beneficial for people who are first starting out in poetry and don't know what to read books like this. But I value very different things in my poetry. I like imagery, I like emotional resonance, I like a playing with structure, and I just didn't see that happening here. Now, in terms of a book, I would say this is more like a self-help book with some poems thrown in. So I am cheating a little bit by using this for the Sealey challenge, but I don't think that really matters. I liked the idea of it, but I'm also not one who's really into self-help. So, like, it was cute, it just didn't really do much for me, which is why I'm rating it 3 stars. Alright guys, that is it from me today. I know this video is going up a little bit later than usual, but I appreciate you for watching this. If you liked what you see, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. I post videos every Wednesday and Sunday, sometimes Friday. You can find me on all social media platforms as @ShellyFlowers. Alright, ciao y'all.